Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I'm your host, Pierce Redmond. You can find this show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. If you are new to the show, there are lots of ways to listen. You can, of course, find everything archived on my website and and on AFR. I'm also on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play, Podbean, Player FM. Pretty much where all reputable people go to find podcasts. You can find Porkins Policy Radio. I am also on YouTube as well, so you definitely subscribe to the YouTube channel if you'd like to. It's funny, every time I mention or bemoan how much YouTube is annoying me, I get all of these messages from the small but dedicated listener base on YouTube saying, please don't shut down the channel. So I don't plan on doing that anytime soon, so don't worry if you listen to it on YouTube. Very quickly, I've got a couple of updates and some announcements and stuff that I want to get out of the way, and then we will dive into this week's show, which will be jam-packed with information. But I just wanted to plug the latest episode of the latest bonus podcast, which did technically come out in January, although I think it was January 30th or the 31st. But really good episode. If people have not checked it out, I would encourage them to go listen to it. Of course, if you want to support my work, you can become a subscriber for as little as $1 a month, and that single solitary dollar gives you access to the bonus podcast. And last month, for the month of January, we spoke with good friend Michael Swanson of WallStreetWindow.com, all about the coup in Venezuela, or the now I suppose sort of failed coup. And we talked a variety of angles with that, including the economic sanctions, the sort of insane rhetoric and actions coming out of John Bolton. Michael got into how Cuba plays a central role in all of this. We got into the troika of tyranny. So a lot in that episode. And a lot of that stuff that we talked about this was a few weeks ago is sort of like beginning to kind of come to fruition. I think a lot of Michael's predictions and analysis was very spot on. So definitely check that out. Also, if you haven't, a great episode, last week's episode with good friend Ryan Carey, where we spoke about Nick Dernasso's Sabrina. Definitely check that out if you have not already. Gotten a good response to that. And also just want to plug Ryan has a Patreon. So if you like Ryan Carey's work, if you like the stuff that he does on this show and on his website, definitely go check that out. And I believe it's patreon.com/4color-apocalypse, I believe is his Patreon page. Although if you go to the previous episode, you will find it. And then also one other thing just on the Patreon thing, I am going to be finally sort of implementing some serious changes to Patreon, mainly with the rewards and how that's going to function. And I'll just sort of tease it out that I've got a plan for some really interesting higher level rewards, because I know that people haven't been too excited about the rewards as such, but there's some goodies I think in the near future, some of the higher tiers that I think people are going to really be excited about and want to be a part of that. It'll be a little interactive. And also, but kind of sticking to some of the old school Porkins types episodes. So definitely keep your ear to the ground with some Patreon news. And then finally, and I'll stop kind of babbling on here, I just wanted to mention that I was on the Sputnik radio station, the Sputnik radio show Fault Lines, this morning with, Garland Nixon and Lee Stranahan. So I was the final guest. I was like on the 9:40 to 10 a.m. slot. Very, very cool. Very exciting. I was talking all about, Venezuela and what's been going on. We also talked a little bit about Iran, regime change, stuff, color revolutions. And it was very exciting to be on Fault Lines, which is their probably one of their biggest shows. Definitely it's like their drive time show. Super cool. If anyone is listening, I tweeted the Periscope link to that, and I'll of course post the full episode once it's available. And it might already be available on iTunes right now. I have to double check that, but I will post that as soon as I can. But my computer did crash just at the very end when I was plugging American Freedom Radio, unfortunately. So if you're listening and you hear me getting cut off, that's why. I wasn't the Russian government censoring me or anything like that. But and I will be on Fault Lines hopefully in the next couple of weeks again, so I'll definitely let people know.
And you'll be appearing in an upcoming indictment from Special Counsel Robert Mueller.
Well, on the line, I guess that's probably my cue to introduce my guest. We are joined by good friends of the show, frequent guest Brian Heiss, of course, of OJSimpson.co, and another good friend of the show and frequent guest, private investigator Pat McKenna. Brian and Pat, how are you? It's good to have you back on.
Good to be here.
Hey, Pierce. Great to be here. Greetings from the city of brotherly love, home of Benjamin Franklin, Gritty.
Well, I'm joined by Brian and Pat, for a couple of reasons. One is that I wanted to, and I had to sort of been thinking about this, doing, another, OJ episode. I kind of wanted it to be, like a final one, and in part because I was getting quite a lot of traffic on YouTube again, people listening to the old episodes, a particular lot, that, you and I did, Pat. And mainly to, nitpick and criticize and tell us how we were all wrong. But it seemed like, the interest was there. And you'd love these, Pat, if you ever go through the comments. It's like, well, McKenna says that an hour and 21 minutes and 42 seconds in that such and, these like the minutia,
right.
There was also
that was my comment. No, I'm kidding.
Pat, there was also a big conspiracy. We've always recorded with you on your phone, and sometimes on the Skype call you'll hear like a beeping sound, which is it just happens with phones. And there was a conspiracy going on, a theory amongst some of the YouTube listeners that every time that happened, that you were about to say something important about the crime, and I don't know, I guess the NSA was bleeping you out or something.
Well, that's true, right, Pat?
Yeah.
and I would respond. I would say like, fellas, this just happens with Skype, and we're broadcasting it live. There's all sorts of weird, and there was oh sure, okay, yeah, whatever you say, you and McKenna.
Yeah.
But
hey Pierce, you know what you'll never find on a Google search, a Bing search, a Yahoo search, or anything?
What?
You'll never find a comment someone's left on a YouTube video.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
They could leave, you'll never get a link to that material because it's irrelevant.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and
which is why on the content I publish at OJSimpson.co, or you can follow me on Twitter at Brian Heiss. I don't have comments turned on, but if you go to OJSimpson.co, you can click the contact link and get in touch with me directly. It's very clearly spelled out there at OJSimpson.co. Right, Pat?
Oh, yeah.
Well, and Brian, then you had sort of contacted me and you said you wanted to do you and Pat wanted to come on to talk about I guess some more of the sort of the scientific angle to this, which I think makes for a good kind of final episode or a final piece on the OJ trial. Is because I think when I started this whole saga of covering it, you know, it was, I guess it was partly on the scientific level, but also just the sort of, you know, how the investigation was carried out and a lot of the mistakes and whatnot. But the scientific side of it, I think, is particularly fascinating and interesting because there's really not a lot you can kind of argue when it comes to all of that. So, you know, and this is something that you've been covering a bit in some recent videos, Brian, that we will link up to in the show notes for this, including a long one, about an hour long that you did, all about the crime lab. Before we kind of dive into that, Pat, I'd love to kind of just get your initial perspective on this, the scientific side of this. Why, you know, it's funny because it doesn't get nearly enough play in the, you know, from people that are trying to kind of understand this or be critical of it. And it's funny that the prosecution and the group that is just utterly convinced that they know this case inside and out, that OJ's guilty, blah, blah, blah. They always talk about the mountains of evidence. And, you know, I've seen these interviews with Furman talking about, you know, how much blood there was. And undoubtedly there was a lot of blood. But when you get down to the sort of nitty-gritty science of it, there really wasn't a lot of OJ blood. And Pat, I'm just curious to get your take on that, the kind of spin that the media and the prosecution and others have kind of put on it when it comes to the science of this.
Constantly, you heard from the prosecutor and the media, it was like the odds were like 100 trillion to 1, that it has to be OJ and nobody else, and this and that. And as the trial unfolded, excuse me, and Brian did a good job on the video. Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld and I think Bob Blazer, they did an excellent job of taking the government's witnesses, their tests, and their stuff, and showing how flawed it was, especially Yamauchi, when people say all that blood. And I'm certainly not one to talk science. Trust me, I'm a street guy, but and more of an Occam's razor type investigator. And this notion that there was so much evidence, a mountain of evidence and all that sort of stuff is, it's really laughable. But it affected me because when I got on the case, excuse me, on June 15th, I think I got called by Shapiro to head to Chicago. I thought Simpson was guilty because all I saw on television was all this evidence that pointed to one person and one person only. That was OJ Simpson. And there's evidence such as, you know, bloody clothes in his washing machine and, excuse me, a ski mask and just tons of stuff that kept coming out for, I want to say, every day for the first week of that case. That he was there was no other suspect, the only suspect, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, they jumped to that conclusion at the very beginning, and then they tried to fill it in with science, you know. When they saw that glove at Rockingham, that there's no doubt in my mind Mark Furman or his partner Roberts, I think his name was Brad Roberts, stuck it over there. Because there's no other evidence to link O.J. Simpson to this crime. And I thought, you know, we destroyed Furman, Bailey on his cross, et cetera. And the books that came out later now realize, you know, they want to torch this governor of Virginia for wearing blackface back in '84. It's like on every night, these stories. And yet here's Mark Furman in his own words coming out of his own mouth is some of the most vile, odious, racist stuff. And then we got criticized for pointing it out that maybe there's something wrong here. If it's only the glove, speaking of science, why isn't O.J. Simpson drenched in blood? Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of blood. It's all Nicole's and Goldman's. And
as Pat mentioned, 3 of the world's leading criminalists, Michael Baden, Henry Lee, and Dr. Cyril Wecht, who wasn't involved in the case, all have testified to or written in books that the killer or killers of Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman would have been covered in blood.
Yeah, sure.
No, go ahead, Pat. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and that's just the blood part of it. As you know, as the case unfolded and we started to build a timeline and, you know, interview Simpson at the jail and stuff. It's, you know, I came away, well, from Chicago at least. I think I've said this before in your show that I was scratching my head because I said, this doesn't going in thinking he was guilty, I thought, well, let me start asking questions about cuts and bruises and all that. Maybe there's a self-defense. I had no idea what theory would unfold, so you start to ask all kinds of questions as an investigator. And I came away after interviewing everybody, excuse me, from the O'Hare Plaza Hotel, the Hertz Rent-A-Car people that OJ was there for a golf tournament, the American Airlines people, all those interviews that I conducted in Chicago were all in the presence of the other side's, quote, investigator. Hertz guy was a former homicide detective, their private guy. American Airlines was a couple FBI agents. I forget the O'Hare Plaza guy. I think he was a former agent too. And, you know, every time the one was over, they'd pop in with some questions, you know, and we'd all like look at each other afterwards and go, wow, nuts. You know, you just say, sure doesn't sound like a guy that just horribly slaughtered two people. And of course, at the time, you just hear, well, it was murder to double murder. You know, that sounds, all right, it's a double murder. But when you really look at the, you know, the viciousness of these killings, and then you compare it to Simpson's, you know, time that he had, his demeanor in Chicago and all that, you go, this ain't a guy that could act this way. You just can't, you know, you just can't go from being a person like you, me, or any of your listeners would be that are generally normal, nice people, and then ask any of them how they would behave if they just got done murdering two people, one of which was your ex-wife. You just wouldn't behave that way. Anyways, we've covered that ground a lot, but
well, we're going to be talking about some more of the kind of like I said, the scientific angle to this, which is I think it's a topic that we have discussed before on the show, both with you, Pat, also with Steven Singular, with Brian, but I wanted to kind of there's a little bit, you know, more to that whole story. And, you know, we're also gonna kind of expand that conversation out, talk about, not only how the LA Crime Lab, the Scientific Investigation Division screwed up the OJ case, but the larger ramifications of that. And quickly, before we kind of dive into the environment, that the Scientific Investigation Division worked in terms of LA, we're going to be, you know, mainly kind of focusing on people like Dennis Fung, Andrea Mazzola, and Collin Yamauchi. And Pat, I just wanted to quickly just give us your like impressions of these three, because they really are. I was rewatching and watching some of Brian's videos on this. I mean, they are just absolute clowns. I mean, particularly. I mean, actually, I can't really tell. They all, at times, say the most insane things. And just, you were in the courtroom for a lot of this. And what did you make of these three?
Well, I'm in my 45th year of doing this, and most of it's been criminal defense, probably for 35 to 40 of those years. And, you know, you get a sense when you see police officers and crime people and all that in a courtroom, you know, they're not there as scientists, right, or crime labs. They're there to help the prosecution get a conviction, whether the guy is innocent or guilty. That's why there's so many people that have been exonerated in the last 2 years by DNA that, you know, exonerated them after being found guilty. A lot of them on death row, phony science. I mean, bite marks, hair and fiber, all of that stuff has been debunked as not scientifically reliable. And you see it all the time. And so back in those days, you're just thinking, well, I mean, it was the entire LAPD, crime lab, district attorney's office, everybody shooting for one thing and one thing only, and that was a conviction. When you step back and look, that they found this glove, quote, found it early in the morning that night, and they never looked anywhere else. Never again. It was all OJ Simpson. And, you know, and Simpson, his family, his friends completely, cooperated with the government and with the cops. And people on the street in the timeline. They came forward. They said, wow, there's a double murder in my neighborhood. Here's what I saw. Here's what I heard. And they latch into craziness. They latch into, one guy said he heard a plaintive wail of a dog at 10:50. And so that made their timeline at 10:15 when the actual people that had no bias, no nothing, they said, hey, here's what I heard, come forward, and they mocked them and criticized them and did everything they could to discredit them. And these people had, they didn't even want, who wants to come into court, number one? No, people don't even want to go to the jury, do we? Number two, who wants to come to court as a witness in a murder trial? Number three, who wants to come into the biggest murder trial ever, and it's on worldwide television? I mean, my experience with all these folks was they were extremely nervous. They were getting worried about being attacked when all they were doing was coming in with their observations, their truthful observations, and it was quite remarkable. And so you go back to saying, okay, you got Dennis Fung and don't forget Michelle Kessler. We always had a side eye on her. I didn't think much of her. We felt that she could have been the one with the sock. We know someone planted the sock and blood on the sock, because it would make no scientific sense that if that sock was worn in this double murder, that there would only be a big fat drop of Nicole's DNA. Nothing from Goldman, no trace evidence, no dirt from the garden where they would have been struggling and fighting and all of that. None of that. There was just a big fat. So how did that happen? And by the way, you look at all the scientific reports on that sock up until the time they came out on, I think it was in September, when they said, Nicole's blood is on OJ's sock. Those socks were looked at by the LAPD crime lab, by the California crime lab, by Henry Lee, by Michael Bodden, and by, I forget the other fellow. I think maybe Gary Sims. No blood observed in every one of these police reports. I don't know, there's maybe 6 of them. No blood observed. I mean, there's big sections where you talk about blood in this form for the crime lab's report. So how does it then happen after it's been examined by all these people with microscopes and everything else? Henry Lee had his own microscope. Michael Bodden did. The crime lab got theirs. There's no blood on these socks. No, nothing, really. And then here it comes out, and that sticks with people.
Interestingly, Gary Sims from the California Department of Justice, who received the sock, I believe, in October or November of 1994, testified that as soon as he opened the package and examined the sock for the first time ever, he could see, in normal light, no microscope, no nothing, this is his testimony, that he could see the drop of blood on that sock that Pat's referring to, that no one prior to him, none of the LAPD criminalists, none of Henry Lee, the greatest criminalist at the time in the United States, Michael Bodden, did not see it even using microscopes.
And Barbara Wolf on our side, one of Bodden's assistants, Dr. Barbara Wolf, she was there. That's all she's done in her career is science and stuff like that. None of them saw this. Then it turns out that the blood went through and through. They could see it on the other side. So you're telling me that
it was high concentrated DNA.
Yeah. So what? It went through his ankle, went in one side, out the other. They had some sort of steer. I think at the closing, Marcia said that Nicole's finger must have touched OJ's sock when he was running away or something. That's how. Because how did this one blood drop get on this sock?
But that theory was disproven by the fact that the way that the stain dried, it was clear that the sock, both sides of the sock, you'd normally have your ankle or the lower part of your leg in the sock. Both sides of the sock, the run pattern of the blood stain drying showed that the socks were laying flat with no leg in it when they dried. And oh, by the way, those socks also contained RFLP. Yeah. I'm not RFLP.
EDTA.
EDTA. Yeah.
Well, again, the sock thing is just one of many questionable issues when it comes to the science of this case and how this came into being. Brian, give us an idea.
Let me correct you for a second. It's not really questionable because the science is very clear and indisputable. One of the things that I tried to do going into putting together this trilogy of episodes of OJ Simpson, Fact or Fiction, I think they're episodes 20, 21, and 22 of the series, was to really make the scientific evidence digestible for people like us who don't have such an advanced scientific background to really understand these things. But in order to really set the stage, I think we need to understand the state of Los Angeles, the state of the city of Los Angeles in 1994 as far as crime and as far as staffing, and compare that to the statistics from 2017. Now, this is from the 1998 LAPD staff report, and these are the statistics, the crime statistics for 1994. That's the first number I'm going to read. The second number I'm going to read is the 2017 CompStat numbers for the 2017 statistics. In 1994, there were 850 murders in Los Angeles. In 2017, there were 282. In 1994, there were 30,622 armed robberies. In 2017, there were 10,784. In 1994, there were 39,990 aggravated assaults. In 2017, there were 16,794. In 1994, there were 1,552 forcible rapes. In 2017, there were 638. In 1994, there were 7,917 LAPD officers. In 2017, there were 10,029 LAPD officers. But the reason I mention those specific crimes are those are crimes that there tends to be more scientific evidence, crimes that rise to the level of a prosecution that would look more at scientific evidence. So what did the Scientific Investigation Division of the Los Angeles Police Department look like in 1994? The total staff, and this includes secretaries, this includes administrative assistants, this includes everyone that worked there, 40. In 2017, with a micro fraction of the amount of crimes that there were in 1994, there are 400 people in the Scientific Investigation Division of the Los Angeles Police Department. So what I'm trying to explain is that these people, these 40 people that worked in that division of the Los Angeles Police Department in 1994 were coming to work every day with a backlog of work because they couldn't keep up with the amount of murders, the amount of rapes, the amount of aggravated assault, the amount of crime that was going on in LA that would require their duties. They couldn't keep up. They testified to this. You were always coming in with a backlog. They were just trying to get through the day. They never had, if you think of that inbox on your desk, theirs was the size of the World Trade Center. It was incredibly tall in 1994. And these people weren't supervised. Greg Matheson, the assistant director of the Scientific Investigation Division, supervised 5 unrelated units of the Scientific Investigation Division. You can't do any kind of good job supervising these people when you're responsible for 5 unrelated units. And because of that, you had things happen like none of the criminalists were trained in the collection and the preservation of evidence to be used for DNA testing. Now, for background, in 1993, the Federal Bureau of Investigation began doing DNA testing in-house. In 1994, Michelle Kessler and the others at the LAPD Crime Lab, Michelle Kessler was the director of the LAPD Crime Lab, the Scientific Investigation Division, decided, hey,
a cop, by the way, at the time.
Her husband was a cop, yes, and in the robbery homicide division, correct?
Yeah, with Ben Adder and Lang and all them.
Yeah. So they decide to add to their offerings DNA testing. Now, at the time, there were 2 types of DNA testing. There was RFLP, restriction fragment length polymorphism, RFLP is like the old school DNA test. It requires between 25 and 50 nanograms of DNA. Okay, you're probably wondering, Pierce, what's a nanogram? Do you know what a nanogram is?
I do, only because I watched your film on this the other night. I do sort of have an idea.
It's 1/1000th of a gram. A picogram is 1/1000000000th of a gram.
And can you, Brian? I know you do explain this or visually in your episodes, but obviously the radio is a audio only. Can you just give the listener sort of a visual of what this looks like? I mean, are we talking about the size of a penny, a pinhead, a speck?
I have to thank the good folks in the school in Israel for who is really into nanotechnology, the creation, making bigger things smaller, who were able to put the Hebrew Bible into the size of a pinhead. You'd have to magnify it 10,000 times in order to see the word under a microscope, but they created it to be a size of a pinhead, about 20 nanograms. And a microliter of blood would contain about 20 nanograms of DNA, which is the size of a pinhead. So in order to run an RFLP test on any item, you would need more than a size of a pinhead of DNA. So RFLP provides far more information than the other type of DNA testing, which is PCR, polymerase chain reaction. PCR basically takes a tiny sample of DNA. It requires 1/2 of 1 nanogram of DNA. And remember, 20 nanograms is the size of a pinhead, so 1/2 of 1 nanogram of DNA is a lot smaller than that. For reference, in a single drop of blood, there are between 500 and 1,000 nanograms of DNA. PCR was really, according to Jack Mertens of the FBI's forensic laboratory, PCR is better for showing that someone did not commit a crime rather than showing guilt. PCR is also exquisitely sensitive and highly susceptible to contamination. This is not my opinion. This is from the Los Angeles Times, July 26, 1994 edition, which provided readers with a overview of RFLP and PCR DNA testing in association with the Simpson case.
Well, and you're talking about the susceptibility of these tests to cross-contamination, to, all sorts of environmental factors and things, which of course kind of brings us to the criminalists who were charged with taking DNA samples, processing the DNA, and ultimately, when you see Garcetti and Marcia Clark and others talking about the mountains of evidence, that's in many, they are referring a lot of the time to all of this DNA evidence. Now, let's talk about the collection of this, because this is, I think, in a lot of ways,
one of the most important aspects of the case, the collection of the evidence at the crime scene. Because how it was collected went against every standard and practice by every scientific group and the FBI, their standards and practices, because there were no standards and practices at the LAPD Scientific Investigation Division because they had no policy or procedure manual. Essentially, you had a group of freelancers, well, think of the criminalists as freelancers, doing whatever they wanted at crime scenes because they had no supervision and they had no standards of how to do things. Although the LAPD manual for all sworn officers has information about collecting blood evidence to preserve for scientific testing, not specifically DNA testing, just scientific testing. None of the criminalists who testified, this is Dennis Fung and Andrea Mazzola, had read that manual.
Well, and they appear to, in testimony and certainly under Barry Scheck's excellent cross-examination.
And Peter Neufeld.
And Peter Neufeld, yeah. But Barry Scheck has just got a great, it must have been fun, Pat, seeing Scheck in the courtroom when he was really kind of like on one, because he becomes, quite passionate, and you just know that he really understands, the problems present with all of this. And it is great, it's worth watching these old, the old tapes and stuff of Scheck, because he really is just masterful in this, and truly one of those, he knows exactly what the answer is going to be to this question, as all good lawyers should. But it seems like Fung and Yamauchi and Mazzola, they just were not prepared to actually be asked. They don't want to answer these.
Pierce, they weren't prepared to do their jobs. More importantly,
exactly.
in their testimony, they weren't prepared to do their job. This doesn't just affect OJ Simpson. This affects any defendant that had crime scene collection done that was used for DNA testing in the state of California before 1995, when they went over a radical reform of the Scientific Investigation Division, because OJ Simpson could afford to pay his attorneys and specialists to shine a light on the cesspool of contamination that was the Scientific Investigation Division.
Yeah.
You know what a cesspool it was, Pierce? You know what they found in Nicole Brown Simpson's reference sample? The blood that they pulled from her corpse, from a vein in her corpse. Do you know what they found in that?
They found someone else's blood too, right?
They found O.J. Simpson's DNA.
Yeah.
That's how contaminated it was. And that's not my opinion. That's proven science.
What were you going to say, Pat? You're jumping in there.
I was just going to say it was fun watching Barry and Peter, but what was more fun for me was picking up the Discovery. They'd say, okay, Pat, go down and get there's a bunch of Discovery pickup. There'd be like a 24-inch high stack of reports, right, that was all DNA, and I'd bring it back to their hotel room, and I spent a lot of time with Barry and Peter outside of the courtrooms, because I was trying to learn too, and but it was way over my, I was just learning about how screwed up this place was in their collection. But they broke it down by taking and that's what was fun for me, because you have no idea how hard these guys worked. And, I just remember one time getting this stack of papers, and on the top it had all kinds of markings and stuff. And I said to Peter, I said, look, here's Prince's, when Prince became a symbol or something. I said, I think they got Prince's symbol right on this front page. And we were laughing about it, but really, Neufeld read that stuff all night long and cross-examined their expert the next day, the guy from, I forget his name, from Australia, who finally admitted, after relentless by Peter, he said, I'm embarrassed and ashamed, Mr. Neufeld, you found my mistake. This is a guy that said it was 1,000,000,000 to 1 or something, right? And Peter destroyed the guy, but not in a, real aggressive way. It was just taking him through the paces, because Peter and Barry understood it as well as any two men on the planet, because they've been doing it I had known them. We had worked on cases before where I had done some investigation, and they were brilliant when it comes to this stuff. And thank God they decided to continue doing just that in the Innocence Project and train all these people. This case brought out all these crime shows, where everything gets solved in an hour and everything. So all these shows came out, which piqued everybody's interest, including you do jury selection, and people want to, is there DNA in the case? They want it all solved in this trial.
Yeah.
But what it also spawned is kids that have gone the other way into the Innocence Projects in various states around the country, because you've got a guy, say, for example, I'm working on one right now, the guy's been in custody 31 years. There is no DNA to test, but, since day one, he said, I had nothing to do with my wife. And he can find police reports. You can show that he's, innocent, but yet the prosecution and the government will fight you and fight you and fight you. In other words, they will still, Friday night there was some OJ thing, they're still on there saying, look at all there was so much evidence against OJ Simpson, which is really bullshit. There wasn't that much. There was the absence of evidence, not the presence of evidence, that shows the guy couldn't have done this. But I just think that Peter and Barry have just done such remarkable stuff with the advancing of that. And basically, they made prosecutions better. They've got prosecution integrity type units that come and look at these. This younger generation of prosecutors will at least give you the time of day to look and go through the stuff and point out what you think they should look at. New York's got one. I think Cook County's got one in Chicago. But they're starting to say, wow, maybe we did make a mistake, because the only way you can put a guy, an innocent man, in prison and keep there for 30 years is that the cops and the prosecutors and the judges and the juries and usually the media are all on the same page. And and some poor guy, some schnook with no money and no lawyer, or a very inexperienced lawyer, they get, boom, run right down the railroad. And so in a way, the case really has helped both sides, because prosecutions now are much better. They get, I just had one where our DNA expert comes back, because we had independent testing and all. He says, it's your guy. It's his DNA on it says DNA on the magazine. We had a gun guy come in and say, no, that's your guy's gun, and it is tied to both of those other murders. And we had a fingerprint guy. No, that's your fingerprint guy. Our guy says that's his first. So at least we're able to tell our client how, first of all, it was a horrible case, but how much science that the state had, and our guys could not dispute it. So, we sat with his mom and family and all that, and because they were so good at their job, thank God we got a plea. But, they were seeking death on the guy. I thought the guy'd get death. I said, this case is going to be a death case. We're going to be fighting this forever. And at least I think that at high levels of the state attorney here, they said, we're not going to spend all this money if you're going to plead guilty to consecutive life sentences on all the murders. So it made no sense. If he's good, if the plea was offered before, which sometimes gets me when prosecutors think he's a human being enough to get a plea offer of life in prison with no parole, but if we go to trial, they're going to seek death. I never understood that. Just punishing the guy for going to trial.
Well, yeah, punishing them for, they have to do their job then.
They got to work. Yeah, exactly.
And Pierce, to Pat's point, immediately after the Simpson trial, LAPD added 32 employees to the Scientific Investigation Division, essentially doubling its staff. They spent $500,000 on new training programs, and they invested $3 million in facility and equipment upgrades. The Los Angeles Times credits the Simpson case for convincing the California state legislature to fund the county's $102 million regional crime lab, which opened in 2007.
No, obviously, I think there's, some good comes out of it. I think the sort of lack of oversight and just the sloppiness, I think, is reminiscent of the criminal justice system in general at that time, but specifically LA. I mean, you've also got, the Rampart scandal happens not that long after all of this, which is not necessarily related, but of course I think it's just, it illustrates what was going on at the LAPD.
Absolutely. It was, there were serious issues, but, from a scientific standpoint, those issues started immediately when you have these untrained people going to crime scenes and collecting blood evidence and serological evidence to be used for DNA testing, because what they were doing and what they testified to having done in the Simpson case is breaking one of the cardinal rules of evidence collection for blood evidence, and that is to put the samples in plastic bags. Pierce, you ever take a beach towel? You ever go to the beach and you go in the water and then you towel off and then you throw the towel in like a plastic bag or something till you get home? You ever open that bag, like a Ziploc bag, and smell that mildew and that bacteria that is built up in there? Well, the same thing happens with a plastic bag with a blood sample, because, when you have a dirty substrate, and a substrate is, any surface that you're taking anything off of. A substrate could be the concrete walkway outside Nicole Simpson's house. So when they take that sample on a swatch and then they put that sample in a plastic bag, the plastic allows that bacteria to develop, and it develops immediately. And one thing that causes it to develop even faster and cause that degradation of the sample, the bacteria to degrade the element that's in there, in this case, a sample of blood that was collected from a crime scene, is heat. So what the folks at LAPD, specifically Dennis Fung and Andrea Mazzola, did is they collected the evidence going against the LAPD sworn officer manual, which says never, ever place blood evidence or bodily fluids in plastic because of this specific reason. Also, every scientific criminalist manual that had been written up until that time had advised the same thing. So what Dennis Fung and Andrea Mazzola inadvertently did, and I say inadvertently because they weren't trained to collect evidence that was to be used for DNA testing, and they apparently had never read the LAPD sworn officer manual, is place all of the samples from both crime scenes, all of the blood samples, in plastic bags, and then they put them in the tiny coin envelopes, they're called, which are just basically, small brown envelopes, and they seal it, and they put it in the LAPD crime lab van. And you gotta think, because today you think crime lab vans, you think CSI, you think, any cop show very advanced, technologically equipped. Well, the LAPD crime lab van in 1994 had something that really wasn't working, and that something was a refrigerator. And it was hot that day in June, that June 13th day, and they put the evidence, the blood evidence, in these individual plastic bags in that hot crime van with a refrigerator that didn't work, so they were unrefrigerated, and they let them cook for 7 or 8 hours in that van. So by the time you returned to the crime lab and preserved them for overnight to be tested the next day and examined and analyzed the next day, a lot of that evidence had significantly, if not totally, degraded. Mm-hmm. To the point that the original sample that was collected on the swatch wasn't there. Well, I mean, the DNA wasn't viable. It wasn't, not even usable. The bacteria had eaten it away. That's scientific fact. Because we know about the samples that produced a DNA results for the blood samples, whether it be Nicole Brown's blood, Ron Goldman's blood, or Mr. Simpson's blood. But how it got there, in the case of Mr. Simpson's blood, is quite eye-opening.
I was just going to add too. I mean, just to clarify as well. I mean, Fung didn't even attempt to put these samples in the refrigerator, and when he was asked about this, I mean, I almost fell out of my chair the other day when I was watching your film on this, Brian. I mean, he says, because he says it like, oh, well, now listen, hold on, I didn't put them in there because the refrigerator it stopped working after several hours, implying that it would have been working for, I don't know, at least a few hours. I mean, it's like, why not even attempt to, it's like, no, so it stops working after 4 hours. So rather than keep it chilled for 4 hours and then have another additional 3 hours where it's warm, I just stuck them in a hot van. And then he talks about, I periodically check to make sure that, if it was getting too hot in there. And check is great, when he says like, well, it was pretty hot that day, in June. I mean, it was, it's the summer, and he says,
go ahead.
Well, no, Fung is just so ridiculous. He's like, well, I checked to make sure did it get too hot? I mean, it was getting hot. It was getting warm, yes. It's like. And
Barry Scheck goes, wouldn't you just go out there, open the door, and wave your hands?
Right. Well, he didn't even have an answer to that. But yeah, I mean, it's funny, We're getting up towards the first break here. I just wanted to kind of hammer this point again. Pat, you were mentioning before, and I think you've even mentioned this before on the show. People are so obsessed with we want to see the DNA evidence, even in cases where like there is no DNA. Not every case has DNA evidence. Might be a big shocker to some people. But of course, with a lot of these crime shows,
it's important to state that there have been huge advances in DNA technology between 1994 and 2019. I mean, enormous advances in DNA technology. Yeah.
Oh no, I'm not even doubting that.
But even with those advances, as we'll get to in the second hour, there are certain things that scientists need to do, and companies have invested millions upon millions of dollars in preventative measures to avoid cross-contamination when you're dealing with PCR testing, because it's the most sensitive, the DQ alpha, the most sensitive DNA testing out there.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that, the show me the DNA evidence is irrelevant when the DNA is so easily contaminated. I disagree.
It's still relevant, but the DNA is so easily contaminated, but it starts with the collection. The collection's the most important part, because if that evidence had not been put in plastic bags and had not been in a hot van for 7 hours and had not had the ability to degrade significantly or totally as it did, even with Yamauchi's carelessness, that evidence could have shown the truth.
Oh yeah, right. No, I mean that's what I was going to allude to there. Is just that it begins with the collection. And right, I mean you could be running all of the DNA tests you want, and they might even be you might be eliciting the results that you might want. But if the DNA has been contaminated from the beginning, I mean, there's a serious problem, when it comes to this. And I think as we'll explore a bit more in the second hour.
People will say, and they'll listen to this and they'll say, well, what about, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman's blood? Why didn't that degrade? Well, it did. It did significantly degrade, as you'll see when we talk about the DNA results from the crime scenes. Both of their samples did significantly degrade, but keep in mind there was a lot more of their blood at the crime scene as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, I mean, I'm sure people will be saying, oh, well, look at this, look at that. It's always the what about when it comes to this case in particular.
But we're not talking about what abouts. We're talking about scientific facts, indisputable facts in relation to this case. We're using prosecution testimony to make digestible what happened with this blood evidence, and in the second hour we'll really debunk the fact that there was all this blood.
Right, exactly. Which, yeah, there really wasn't all of this blood, or that term has been bandied about and has almost no significance to this. But yeah, it is. I think this is all important too, because it I think for a lot of people that might come to this case with no knowledge, overwhelmed by a lot of this stuff, like Pat, you and I have done like 6 hours on this, a lot of information there. This is the type of stuff that at the very least, it will create doubt. There is something, there isn't a reasonable doubt to believe this. There is reason to think that something else is happening with this evidence, which is altering, what we're being presented.
And one of the reasons that we started out reviewing the state of the Los Angeles in 1994 is so they would have an idea of the landscape that we're dealing with and the environment.
Absolutely. Well, we will continue the conversation in the second hour with Brian Heiss and Pat McKenna, so please stay tuned.
deadly narcotics.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
Quality, value, style, service, selection, convenience, economy, savings, performance, experience, hospitality, low rates, friendly service, name brands, easy terms, affordable prices, money-back guarantee, free installation. Free admission, free appraisal, free alterations, free delivery, free estimates, free home trial, and free parking. No cash, no problem, no kidding. No fuss, no muss, no risk, no obligation, no red tape, no down payment, no entry fee, no hidden charges, no purchase necessary, no one will call on you, no payments or interest till September. What? Limited time only, though, so act now, order today, send no money, offer good while supplies last, 2 to a customer, each item sold separately, batteries not included, mileage may vary, all sales are final, allow 6 weeks for delivery, some items not available, some assembly required, some restrictions may apply. So come on in. Come on in. Come on in. There you. So come on in for a free demonstration and a free consultation with our friendly professional staff. Our experienced and knowledgeable sales representatives will help you make a selection that's just right for you and just right for your budget. And say, don't forget to pick up your free gift, a classic, deluxe, custom, designer, luxury, prestige, high-quality, premium, select, gourmet pocket pencil sharpener. Yours for the asking, no purchase necessary. It's our way of saying thank you. And if you act now, we'll include an extra added free complimentary bonus gift, a classic, deluxe, custom, designer, luxury, prestige, high-quality, premium, select, gourmet, combination key ring, magnifying glass, and garden hose in a genuine imitation leather-style carrying case with authentic vinyl trim. Yours for the asking, no purchase necessary. It's our way of saying thank you. Actually, it's our way of saying bend over just a little bit farther.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
When the weapons of mass destruction turned out not to be true, I expected the American people to rise up. They didn't. Then, when the Abu Ghraib torture thing surfaced, and it was revealed that our government participated in rendition, a practice where we kidnap people and turn them over to regimes who specialize in torture, I was sure then the American people would be heard from. We stood mute. Then came the news that we jailed thousands of so-called terrorist suspects, locked them up without the right to a trial or even the right to confront their accusers. Certainly, we would never stand for that. We did. And now it's been discovered the executive branch has been conducting massive, illegal, domestic surveillance on its own citizens, you and me. And I at least consoled myself that finally, the American people will have had enough. Evidently, we haven't. In fact, if the people of this country have spoken the messages, we're okay with it all.
Yo, what's up? Check this out.
The voice of the revolution. American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow, friendships to flourish, with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control deal out. Control is good. 5. Roger, copy. 4, 3, 2, 1. Engage.
Prepare your mind. to experience. American Freedom Radio.
Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. Just a reminder that if you want to support my work, if you enjoy the show that you're listening to right this very second, or if you're listening to it later, if you like any of the work I do, then please go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond, and you can become a subscriber for as little as $1 a month. If you are just joining us here, we are speaking with good friends of the show, Brian Heiss and Pat McKenna, about the OJ trial. We're talking about some of the science, but that was involved in this, or perhaps maybe the lack of science or the lack of scientific controls that were present when it came to the OJ trial. I had brought this up just towards the end of the first hour there, that when sometimes when I'll talk about OJ, and I kind of don't anymore. I think all my friends, know where I stand when it comes to the trial and whatnot. But I think it can be daunting if you're trying to explain to someone for the first time, why you think OJ didn't do it, or why you don't believe this. It's hard to kind of convince someone that. But I think that what we're talking about here, what we'll kind of expand upon in the second hour, is I think an easier way, because what it does is it brings in reasonable doubt. When I was watching the old tapes of Sheck in the courtroom interrogating Yamauchi, and also Fung and Mazzola, but particularly Yamauchi, I mean, you can see that you don't have to be a high-priced lawyer or a PhD in microbiology. You don't need to have those sort of credentials to know that what is being presented to you is you're going to think there is a reasonable doubt. And again, think if you were that person on trial, and you were being accused of something, and someone like Yamauchi is opening up blood vials with your blood, and it's spraying everywhere. He's not wiping anything down. He's never changing his gloves. He's not really totally sure, the chronology of events, even based on his own notes. I mean, this would tend to believe this would raise the possibility of reasonable doubt, that you can't 100% unequivocally say he did it. I know he did it based on the evidence that's being presented. So I think that's why this is an important conversation to have. And I don't know, I'll throw it to the both of you if you want to kind of expand on that, or we can kind of dig into Yamauchi, who really, I mean, in my opinion, just is like a total buffoon. I know, Brian, you take a more nuanced opinion of Yamauchi.
I think he's careless. I think he's careless, Collin Yamauchi. That's what I call him. Because I think that he was overworked. I think we've proven that just based on the statistics, based on the staffing, that he was incredibly overworked. It was his understanding at the time that he was doing this testing. This is on, Pat, is it the 14th or the 15th that he began doing the testing?
I don't know if it was that soon. But
it was.
Sure. Was it?
So he begins the testing at a time that he was told that OJ had, quote, an airtight alibi.
Right.
Because that's what he had seen on the news. And he had heard from others in LAPD that OJ had an airtight alibi. So you have careless Collin Yamauchi with a backlog of work already. He's not taking the time to be a precise Pete. He's doing what he always does. I'm just trying to get through the day. And he breaks a lot of the rules of evidence handling. The biggest one is never handle a suspect or a victim's reference sample at the same time that you're handling evidence from the scene. Let me explain. So, careless Collin Yamauchi didn't, to prove he's careless, he couldn't put together the notes that he had written down while he was doing his examination of the materials. So it came on Barry Scheck, Mr. Simpson's lawyer, to piece together his notes based on the order. He first had Collin Yamauchi put numbers on each page of the notes to say, hey, this is the order that I did things in. And then Barry Scheck was able to use those notes in the order that he had them in to disprove that order and to show that the first thing he did, according to his notes, was handle Mr. Simpson's reference sample. The next thing he did was to handle the Rockingham glove. The next thing he did was to handle the Bundy swatches. So they were all out at the same time on a large table just a large table with a sheet of white butcher block paper on it, and then each of the evidence samples with chem wipes under them to avoid having the evidence get onto the paper. And this is a great example of him being lazy. So what you're supposed to do each time you handle evidence in a case is you put down a fresh sheet of butcher block paper, and then you handle the evidence, you examine the evidence, you clean up, you change your gloves, you get rid of the paper that you use to examine that piece of evidence, and you take a bleach solution and wash down the table. Now there are actually companies sell solutions specifically designed to wash down a table for criminalists. But in between each piece of evidence that you handle, what Collin did was he took, and a chem wipe is, I guess, the best way to describe, it's kind of like a thinner baby wipe, the baby wipes to clean, babies. But that's essentially what a chem wipe is. It's thinner and, it's used to, it's used like a towel, like a microfiber towel, but it's not microfiber, obviously. So he has chem wipes, and he has each piece of evidence from the Bundy crime scene. The Bundy crime scene, of course, is where the murders occurred. Rockingham is Mr. Simpson's home, where he lived. At the Bundy crime scene, the evidence that he had out on that table was the Rockingham glove, the glove that Mark Furman found at Mr. Simpson's home, and the the blood samples collected from the Bundy murder scene. He had all those each sitting on a chem wipe or two on top of butcher block paper. At the same time, the first thing he does is handle Mr. Simpson's reference sample. And he was a prosecution witness. He was a government witness for the state of California, the county of Los Angeles. When he was questioned on direct examination, he didn't mention this very important piece of information that I'm about to share with you. It was Mr. Scheck who extracted from him that when he opened Mr. Simpson's reference sample, and Mr. OJ's reference sample is the blood that they stuck a needle in his vein on June 13th when he came back from Chicago and voluntarily met with LAPD detectives Van Adder and Lang at Parker Center without his lawyer present. He volunteered to give them a sample of his blood. So they stuck it in his vein and extracted the blood sample. And when you take it directly from your vein and put it into a test tube, that's considered high concentrated DNA because it hasn't had the opportunity to degrade. What degrades DNA? Sunlight, chlorine, other chemicals, dirt. A lot of things can contaminate and degrade DNA. Bacteria, as we talked about in the first hour. So high concentrated DNA is the type that we're talking about in a single drop of blood. you're going to have between 500 and 1,000 nanograms of DNA. So he had, if you've ever gotten your blood tested or a blood sample taken, there was a healthy amount of OJ's DNA in terms of volume of blood. So Collin Yamauchi, the LAPD criminalist who was in charge of all of the evidence at the LAPD crime lab, the scientific investigation division, opens Mr. Simpson's reference sample and the blood spurted onto the chem wipes that he was using to cover the when he pulled open OJ's reference sample of blood, and it spurted on the chem wipes and soaked through and got on his gloves. Per his testimony, criminalist Collin Yamauchi is not sure if he changed his gloves after handling Mr. Simpson's reference sample and the blood getting on them. Now, you're supposed to. Scientific procedure calls for you to change your gloves between handling each piece of evidence. Collin testified, I don't think that you need to do that. That was his testimony. That's what he said under oath. You can go check at glovecase2018.com. You can go and look up the transcripts of the trial and read the testimony to see that we're not telling you anything that's just malarkey. So, at the same time that Collin Yamauchi has on that butcher block paper with the chem wipes on each piece of evidence, the Rockingham glove, and all of this crime scene samples, the degraded samples that were collected from Bundy, where the murders occurred, he had just spilled blood on his gloves. And I'm going to let you take it from there, Pat, to explain why that's important.
Well, when he I think there was 4, quote, drops along the shoe print on the way out. Okay? Each one of those so-called drops had different amounts of degraded DNA in them. So I always used to tell, I'm trying to think of the various journalists I fought with, like Jeff Tube, and so we're having a drink at an Irish joint in LA, and I said, look, I put 4 napkins on the table, and I said, I put my finger in a glass of water, and I went 1, 2, 3, 4. And anybody can do this at home. It's a big fat drop. The first one, it goes down, down, down. Then if you go with 4 napkins next to it, and you finger in the glass, drop, finger in the glass, drop, finger in the glass, drop, finger in the glass, drop. They're all about the same size drops. It's not science, right? It's just what I was sitting there trying to, in my mind, figure out what's going on. And everybody's going, oh, Pat, there's blood everywhere. And by that time, I've spent hours and hours with Simpson and have come at that time to believe this guy's completely innocent and getting framed by a racist cop. And the media's going along for the ride. I mean, they to this day still do it. You can't get a show on TV like what we're doing here. You get laughed off. They want to talk to, like last Friday night, who's on there? Marcia Clark, Tom Lang, the guys from the SWAT team, So it's just the same shit over and over on the media of how guilty he is. And, it's hard to tell people, for example, like this stuff we just talked about. So not being a scientist, I was showing Tubin with the napkins, and I could see the look on his face like, wow, that kind of makes sense. Not from a scientific level, but it would explain why there's 4 different sizes of, quote, blood next to these shoe prints. It turns out none of those were probably Simpson. None of that. That was all contaminated from his moving swatches around with the same gloves on and all that sort of stuff.
And essentially what Pat's saying, if you've ever gone to the beach and gone in the water, I know I keep going back to the beach for my analogies, and your feet are wet, and if you look at your footprints in the sand, each footprint, the first footprint that you make, that's going to be pretty wet and heavy. But by the time you're to the 10th footprint, it's going to be not a lot of water, not a lot of water in your footprint. And that's kind of the way it happened, because the first item of evidence that Yamauchi handles after spilling Mr. Simpson's reference sample onto his gloves, or the blood spurting onto the chem wipes, as he's testified to, not sure if he changed his gloves after it, has the most DNA of any that matched O.J. Simpson. The next piece of evidence that he handles from the Bundy crime scene has less DNA that matches O.J. Simpson. The next piece of evidence that he handles from the Bundy crime scene, less than that. And it goes in order that he handled each of the swatches, each of the blood evidence from the crime scene that has less and less and less as he goes down the line and handles them. Remember, they're all on that same butcher block paper, all out at the same time per his testimony. Why is that important? We need to go back to what we were talking about in the first hour when we were talking about understanding volumes and thinking how can we visually represent the amount of the amount of DNA that matched O.J. Simpson at the crime scene. We need to go back to the Nano Bible. Remember, the Nano Bible is it's the whole Hebrew Bible on the size of a pinhead. It could fit on a fraction of the tip of your finger. One Nano Bible would fit, you could probably fit, Pierce, you've seen the visual. How many Nano Bibles do you think you could fit on the tip of an average finger? 50?
Oh, yeah, I was going to say 100 maybe. Okay. I mean, yeah, you could fit quite a lot.
A Nano Bible is 20 nanograms. On all of the Bundy blood evidence, all of the blood drops collected from the murder scene, the total amount of DNA that matched O.J. Simpson would fit on 4 Nano Bibles. 84.1 nanograms of DNA. Remember, a single drop of blood has between 500 and 1,000 nanograms of DNA. 84.1 nanograms of DNA is the total amount of DNA. Well, how could it have gotten there? Well, we need to go back to examining Collin Yamauchi's examination of the Rockingham glove. Pat, you've seen that. The Rockingham glove, of course, is the blood that Mark Furman found at the murder scene. At the O.J. Simpson's home. Pat, you've seen that glove.
Yeah,
can you describe how much blood was on that glove? How much blood, not identifying who it matched, how much blood was on that glove when it was collected?
Well, in the morning, I forget we did an experiment, so it was still moist and wet in the morning, which we always felt it was in a plastic bag, probably put in the Bronco first, and then when Furman interviews Cato and hears about these so-called thumps, he goes, remember, he leaves these guys every so often and comes back all of a sudden with this evidence, blood on the truck or in the truck. I mean, how would he know there's blood in the truck on the foot panel without opening the door? So
it was a blood, would you agree that it was a blood-soaked glove?
Yeah.
Okay. Pierce, just out of curiosity, do you know how much of O.J. Simpson's DNA was found on the Bundy gloves? And keep in mind, these gloves are gloves that he was alleged to have owned for 4 years.
Well, I don't know
how much was found on the Bundy glove, the glove that was found at the murder scene next to Ron Goldman's body? How much of OJ's DNA was found on that glove?
I don't know the specific number, but I do know that it's a minuscule amount.
And by a minuscule amount, do you mean 0? Because that's the correct answer.
Yeah, 0. There was 0 on the
blood that gloves that he's owned for 4 years. Do you know how many, on your fingers, you sometimes get hair that you have that grow on your fingers, and, when you have gloves, if you ever turn an old pair of gloves, decent quality, inside out, you'll find, some hairs of yours that, have come off your fingers in the normal wear and tear of a glove. And again, these are gloves that he's alleged to have owned for 4 years. Pierce, how many of OJ's limb hair was found on those gloves?
That is 0.
0. Good answer. You're right.
And there was someone else's hair.
We're talking about the Bundy glove now.
Oh, the Bundy, yeah.
0. So, okay, now we go to the Rockingham glove. As far as limb hair, no limb hair on that glove. There is a Caucasian male hair on the outside of that glove, but they allege that OJ had cut his finger during the fierce struggle that he had with Ron Goldman and Nicole Simpson. And of all the blood found on the glove, where was the blood found that matched O.J. Simpson? You would think it would be probably on the outside of the glove, because, he was allegedly bleeding when he went home from the murder scene, if that happened. So, maybe he was using the outside of the glove to stop the bleeding, or maybe he still had his hand in the glove. Maybe it was like Michael Jackson driving down the street with a bloody glove on his hand, and then that cut on his finger would have, gotten on to the inside of that glove, right? Onto the fingers, and the fingers of the gloves. You would have found blood there, right, Pierce?
Presumably, one would think that.
If your finger's bleeding and your hand is in a glove, you're probably going to find blood on the finger where that was cut, right?
Yeah.
On the inside of the glove we're talking about. How much of OJ's blood was found in any of the fingers, including the thumb of the glove? How much of OJ's DNA was found in any of those areas, fingers and thumb of the glove?
None, correct?
None, correct. Where was the only DNA that matched OJ Simpson found on that glove?
This would be the sort of the part of the glove by the wrist where you would pull it off.
The notch area.
Or what they claimed you would pull it off, even though that doesn't make any sense. But the notch where, of course, Yamauchi touched it.
Well, not only touched it, but it's the notch where Collin Yamauchi wrote his identifying initials, C.Y., Collin Yamauchi. That's the only place, and it's in the same area. Like, let's say you're holding a pen and you're right-handed and you're writing C.Y. Well, if you have blood on your fingers from opening blood that soaked on the pen wipes and got onto your gloves, it's exactly where it would be. And how much of OJ's DNA was found in that area on the Rockingham, the glove Mark Furman found at OJ Simpson's house?
This is like just a few nanograms, right?
Yeah, it would be 1 1/3 nanobibles. So 27 nanograms. So such a minuscule, and remember, this blood, it wasn't blood, when they collected the sample, they were testing it directly from the fabric because the surface was the fabric of the glove. So it's not like they had to take a swatch and go into it. They could test it right from the glove. So it was a preserved surface, whereas, the concrete was less preserved. The concrete of the murder scene is less preserved, correct?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's dirty. There's,
so
moisture.
It should have been a pristine sample, 27 nanograms, or 1 1/3 nanobibles, so 1 1/3 pinheads of DNA that matched O.J. Simpson is all that they found on these gloves that he had owned allegedly for 4 years.
I mean, it's just, again, when you kind of break it down, like I said at the top of the hour, I think it's impossible for reasonable doubt not to enter your mind.
What's impossible, Pierce, is for a human being to be bleeding from their body. Again, high concentrated DNA would be on at least, definitely that notch area of the glove if it was, guess what it was? Which each drop of blood has between 500 and 1,000 nanograms of DNA in it, and that's your blood, my blood, Pat's blood, everyone's blood has between 500 and 1,000 nanograms of DNA in a single drop. So when you think about that, the total amount of DNA that matched O.J. Simpson is about 100, in all of the evidence, is about 100 nanograms of DNA, not including the back gate and the interior. There's one drop in the interior of his foyer, which he is admitted to bleeding there, that matched O.J. Simpson.
No, it's shocking. I think we've covered it before. I mean, the back gate blood is, so questionable as to where that appeared, when it appeared.
Well, I can tell you without a doubt when it appeared, Pierce, based on the degradation pattern and based on the fact that the location that the blood on the back gate was found gets direct sunlight for over 8 hours each day. That location on the back gate gets direct sunlight for over 8 hours a day. As we talked about in the first hour, what's one of the things that degrades DNA, Pierce?
Sunlight.
And it was sitting there for almost a month before they found it. It was found on July 3rd, 1994. The murders were June 12th, 1994. That DNA was not at all degraded, and it was collected using the same procedure that Fung had done in the first place, meaning It was high concentrated DNA that was placed there sometime on July 3rd.
Right.
Not my opinion. That's a fact.
With this sort of stuff in mind, and again, these are supposed to be like, again, if the media is to be believed, if, FX and, the other shows that have, dramatized this, or even the documentary on ESPN, I mean, if they're to be believed, Clark and Darden were just convinced this is a slam dunk. They knew this. But, when you break this down, I mean, it's laughable. And I almost at times felt bad for Yamauchi or Fung when they're being interrogated, because you just know they are so in over their head. They know that they've screwed up. And then when you look over, I mean, Marcia Clark looks like she's about to go kill herself. Christopher Darden looks as if he's going to start sobbing. And Pat, I mean, again, I just would love to get your perspective on this as someone who was there, and who had some interactions with them, but also just as someone that does this for a living. I mean, what possessed Clark and Darden to presumably they had to know something about the LA crime lab. I would have never, even if fine, you want to take this evidence or whatever, but I would have never presented it. I would have, because it just immediately, there's so many holes. And when you look at the video when the camera pans over to them in the courtroom, that they're just thinking, we're totally fucked. Just give us your thoughts, Pat.
Well, like we're discussing here for 2 hours, and we've been on 6 or 8 hours. Back in that day, we would have meetings late into the evening, kicking all this stuff around, right? And you'd go, like, I didn't get out there till I went to Chicago first, but by the time I got out to LA, I think it was in July, early July. He'd already had the preliminary hearing. So you already say, we're sitting around going, well, wait a minute, Dr. Golden, if you remember him from the prelim, of course they used him in the trial, he says there's 2 different sized incisions in these various people, which could indicate 2 different knives. Then you got Ben Adder down at the with Camacho or whatever his name was at the cutlery place, Ross Cutlery, getting a tray full of knives, bringing them back to Golden, that we find out to say, did any of these match, right? All about they think they got the knife. OJ's sitting there going, I bought a knife at Ross Cutlery. Yeah, it's in my freaking closet or whatever you call it, like his dressing room.
Sure.
Hey, Pat, on a side note, I started to interrupt, but the guys from Ross Cutlery, Camacho and the owner of Ross Cutlery, both testified at the preliminary hearing of the Simpson case in late June, early July 1994, after having accepted a large sum of money, I think $25,000 from the National Enquirer for their story of Mr. Simpson's experience when he was filming a pilot for a TV show, and he had shopped at the knife shop. But Marcia Clark still put him on the stand after they collected $25,000 or give or take from the tabloid media, correct?
Well, yeah, but remember, at that point, they don't know that we have the goddamn knife that OJ bought in his house in pristine condition, okay? So they're making a big scene with knives and Ben Adder's going downtown, and they think once again, we think we got our man here. Okay, Dr. Golden fell apart on us. We'll just replace him with a whore that won't say that, okay? So the knives up, and then the judge pulls the brown envelope up, which really screwed us because we wanted them to go ahead and step on it a few times about the knife being from Ross Cutlery. When we have a knife from Ross Cutlery. And then you had the big thing about the plastic bag and the shovel and the Bronco and all this nefarious notion that it's really funny, though, that because I used to ask Marcia, she asked me how it's like the courtroom. I go when there's courtroom dark, I go, Marcia, who the fuck thought this up? OJ Simpson put on a knit cap, drove in his own car over to Nicole's, because why? He didn't have a good seat at the recital, so he's pissed. He's got to catch a plane. So he's got to kill her. Oops, the second guy comes out, got to kill him. Now I got to get rid of everything, all in a matter of about 20 minutes. And I used to say, and then with the shovel in the bag, I said, what is he going to do? Dig a hole and bury these people in a plastic bag and no one would ever find them? What the fuck things like this? Who in your office came up with this theory? I got along with Chicago. Fuck you, McKenna. You know?
I mean, you know, but it's interesting because, her own testimony doesn't, her own witnesses' testimony don't support their basic theory because, Denise Brown herself testified that they saved a seat for OJ at the recital, and he sat, the kids were sitting between, Justin and one of Denise Brown's kids were sitting between OJ and Nicole.
Well, we end up with a videotape that later in the game that he first gave to the prosecutor. They didn't give it to us. They had it before they took that goofy, Steve Garvey's wife or ex-wife or whatever, the fucking bandana on her head.
Candace Garvey.
Foul mood OJ was in, which was total BS. He ran out and got flowers. He's encouraging all the little kids that come by saying hi to everyone. And it was not in a foul mood. So they just kept flowing in different directions, their theory about how horrible this guy is, right? That he murdered 2 people. I mean, the guy just represented that murdered 2 people or 3 people is a pretty bad little dude. This is a regular a person that's never been in trouble before, except for the domestic thing, which he promptly copped to and pled to and signed.
Changed his prenuptial agreement to say explicitly if
get everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So everything he did was except going to the cemetery. You know, we often talk. I said, you know, had you driven down to the jail with AC and got out of the car and said, I didn't do this. I got a team starting all over the place. I got people in Chicago. I got people here. You're going to see when this is over, I did not kill Nicole. So that was like a big mistake because everybody jumped to big conclusion. Oh, that's consciousness of guilt.
Yeah. But going back, I mean, Pat's absolutely right. But going back to the Scientific Investigation Division handling of the evidence, I think that the real tragedy of the tragedy in many ways, but the real hope that it brought about was the tragedy, of course, is the countless number of nameless, faceless men and women who were convicted because of a careless, wild, wild west environment at the Scientific Investigation Division of LAPD prior to the Simpson case, based on faulty evidence and just complete mishandling of evidence. And we're not talking conspiracy. We're only talking conspiracy of carelessness. It was an environment that was run so terribly with no oversight that there are so many countless men and women in Los Angeles County who have been or are in jail wrongfully convicted. And if not for this case shining a light on the facts that we've discussed in this episode, I wonder how long it would have gone on afterwards.
Oh, I think it probably would have it's still been going on. I mean, maybe not as long. I mean, but yeah, absolutely.
It's going on in every quadrant in this country. It's still going on. There's been corruption cases in Philly, Chicago, New Orleans, New York City. I mean, Texas. It's all over, and the only people that really see it every day are the ones in the trenches, like the public defenders and the people that do criminal defense for a living. And it doesn't capture any media attention like something big like this or like Casey Anthony or something. Oh, the prosecutor, when the bright lights go on, prosecutors tend to, here's my day in the grinding it out for 20 years, and now they think they all of a sudden got really much smarter and much greater and much more a terrific person when all they're doing is playing to the bright lights and hoping for the deal afterwards. I mean, and you get it all over the place.
And you know, one of the things that I think that Pat specifically doesn't get enough credit for is all the pro bono work that Pat himself does and all of the public defenders that he works closely with to, you know, help be that light at the end of the tunnel for someone who was wrongfully convicted, or just to teach them the investigative skills that he's learned over the years. Pat's won awards from Public Defenders Association for his work that he's done out of his own goodwill for no money.
No, I do it for mom. You know, when I meet the kid's family or the defendant's family or something, usually the mother, you just kind of get invested in the case and the family, and it's just what we do, what I do and what a lot of people in my world do, not looking for awards or anything like that. It's just saying, God damn,
you've been given awards.
They're still freaking lying. They're still planting evidence. They're still looking the other way at exculpatory stuff. They're still hiding exculpatory stuff. It's maddening that it still goes on. It's just maddening. And we're lucky here in Palm Beach County because we have a terrific public defender. She's just amazing, and the training she gives her people, and they don't give an inch anywhere. Not at the bail hearing, not at the we don't have prelims like they have there, but they don't give an inch. You fight for everything. I don't care what the evidence is. You fight every single thing because you may uncover, where they're dirty. And that'll give you, quote, reasonable doubt. But that's not what you're looking for. When you get a guy that you think is in, you just start going through everything and you go, Jesus, the simplest answer is usually correct. It's not, like you say, okay, so there's some DNA on the sidewalk. Oh, everybody says, his hand was bleeding when he was running away. So that explains it. And you start looking into it and you go, wait a minute, there's a much simpler answer why there's 4 drops that are completely inconsistent. Because if he did do it, the simplest answer would be they're all equal, all 4 of those drops. It just fits in better. I mean, I've been in cases where the government's case is airtight, and you just go over and go, hey, man, thanks for your service. You did a hell of a job there on a violent dude. But, it should be like that in every case. I mean, and if you got it so much, you should just say, like the case I was thinking of, they should have just said, hey, we were ready to plead guilty to life at the beginning as the federal death penalty case. And it's like, no, they wouldn't. Washington won't take a plea. We were going for the death penalty. Same thing's going to happen to that kid in Fort Lauderdale that shot up the school. Every mental health red flag is raised in his whatever short life. Got hardworking kids. They're ready to plead guilty to every single one of those, take life, and run them all consecutive. I don't know what it means to run life consecutive. You get life, you get life. But if they want 26 or 29 life sentences to run life,
right,
we'll take it. Okay, we did it. We're sorry. Just he's not worth. He's worth saving his life. He's not to be killed. Now, if the parents of the kid kill him, okay, I get that. But not some state attorney when the bright lights are on won't look any other way, but I'm getting the death penalty because it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Can you imagine what kind of that is with bringing a jury in, putting the families through all this when he put all those got to be horrific crime scene pictures of all these kids and children. But you know what? The government will take that all the way because it's political for them to do that, The Orlando prosecutor that says, I'm not going to prosecute death penalty cases. So what does the governor do? Kick her out of there and bring in some guy to death penalty.
Someone that will.
Yeah.
Pat, how do you see, is this like getting worse? Is it, I don't know if you've been following, I'm sure you have to some extent because how can you avoid it? But, everyone is lining up to run for president in 2020. And you got people like Kamala Harris, who is, she's essentially just a cop, who, decided to become a politician. And she's so strong on the crime stuff. And she is really like, I don't know what, she's of this, group of people that, it seems like she almost enjoys putting people away. I was listening to this thing, she had this policy, she thought that, education is so important. This is how important education is to Kamala Harris. She wanted to start punishing kids for truancy. This is when she was worked in San Francisco.
San Francisco district attorney.
And she started, she was threatened to put the parents in jail, because their kids are truants.
That gets her all the votes. She can't even count how many votes they get from the people out there until it's one of their own. Because who wants to stand up as a politician? Please elect me, because I'm not going to work that hard. I'm going to make sure these guys are so guilty before I even think about putting them to trial. It's more. You get more votes by saying I'm locking everybody up. I'm sick of crime. Well, who's not sick of crime? right?
Right, exactly.
So, that's like bullshit to the sheep out there. You know, I'm gonna put everybody away for 1 million years. We had a prosecutor in Jacksonville brag that she was gonna work until she had 1 million years worth of prison time on you know, people in Jacksonville. Thank God they booted her ass out of the office. But that case with her, and it was unbelievable. You know how they.
Well, you also have in Florida that insane state attorney general who is so delusional that she thinks global warming is caused by the AIDS quilt.
Yeah, I know that. I mean, it's just, you know. I'm
Is
here
that
for the
damn body or whatever?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's kind of a nut.
Yeah, she's an insane woman.
Yeah, we got plenty of them. So we come here for the weather.
She's the one that said that OJ was not welcome in the state of Florida.
Yeah.
But she's also taken, you know, I don't know how much money from Scientology over the past couple of, decades since they've been down in Clearwater. But back to that again, Pat. I mean, do you see this, like, is the trend is getting worse? I mean, I know, you know, Brian and I seem to be kind of putting a somewhat positive spin on, well, at least now, you know, things are better than they were back during OJ. But I don't know. I mean, you're more kind of like down there, you know, in the trenches with this. I mean, how do you see this, in America right now?
Well, just for example, there's been some stories out here. I'm in Palm Beach County, one county north of us in Martin County. You look at the sentences for black people and the same crime for white people, it's insanely different. And the cases in Palm Beach County where they'll fight for every little thing, the sentences are not nearly as onerous, you know. So what I do, and I travel around the state a lot in different cases, and you get to the wrong county, you know, they want to lock us up like we're some court, like we're conspirators with the defendants. You know, they treat you like garbage, and they criticize everything you do, and they stand next to these guys in uniforms that put the Bible in their hand and raise their right hand and lie in their teeth, you know, and hide it. And well, like you say. Well, it was warm out there, wasn't it? In the middle of the Mojave Desert? No, it wasn't really that warm. Not that day. It wasn't. Oh, the weather's 190 degrees. Wasn't that warm? I didn't feel warm. I was quite comfortable. You know, they'll lie when they don't have to lie. And I don't mean this on every cop. There's plenty of good cops out there, trust me. But there's one.
I think it was Dershowitz who called it test of lying.
Yeah, and I mean, anybody that's in this business for a long time knows exactly what it means. I mean, you know, we talk about it. There's a group of us go to lunch every Tuesday, and we always laugh about it. We name the guys. They say, you know, this guy will look at you and smile like he knows that you know he's lying, but he knows that you can't figure out how he's lying. Yeah, and you can't prove he's lying. And
well, I mean, you know, one great lie that, and it's a great story, and I'm going to ask Pat to share it, is in the OJ case was the experience that Pat and Mr. Peter Neufeld had with a contact sheet of photos.
Yeah. Well, that was Ralph Rokars was their crime scene photographer. So we had 1 million crime scene pictures, right? But we had kept asking for, I don't even know if they use them nowadays, but what's called contact sheets. So when you pull a roll of film out and develop it, each is sequential and the time.
In the order that the picture was taken.
Yeah, and they usually go out and you stand at the corner of, you know, Bundy and Dorothy. You take that picture first to show where you a reference point. Then you move around. Well, you know, Furman from the prelim, we kept saying, why is he pointing at the one glove and not the keys or the beeper or the footprints or the melting ice cream that he quote discovered in the garage? The only thing why? And so then we said, well, when could he have done this? And then we get Rokars
and the prosecution had insisted that picture was taken after he had returned from quote unquote finding the blood at the glove at OJ Simpson's house.
Right. But what had happened was it occurred before he left to go to Rockingham. Okay, then we find out.
But you were able to, and how did you prove that?
Well, we proved it through the contact sheets. In other words, through Ralph Rokar's testimony, which if you could have been there, it's me and Peter sitting at a desk and he's across from us. And then there's a supervisor with like a Panama hat on and a captain or lieutenant. They're about themselves as Peter's asking them. because they had already said throughout this trial that Mark Fuhrman could not have planted the glove because he was always standing next to someone or accompanied by some cop, and they handed him off like a baton. First he's with this cop, then he's with that cop, this cop, that cop. It turns out at 4 a.m. or 4:30, he goes and gets Ralph Rokars, who's in the back, by the back gate taking pictures, and he says, come with me. So he brings Ralph Rokars by himself all the way around and has him take that one picture, okay? Because the contact sheet showed before that picture, he's at the back gate, and after the picture, he went back to the back gate and continued,
And Pat, the murders occurred on June 12th, 1994. The photos were taken June 13th, 1994. When was it that you and Peter were finally able to get the contact sheet from the prosecution?
I want to say it was September of 95, when we're almost
done. And when did the trial end?
October 3rd.
1995. So a month before the trial ended, you were first given the contact sheet?
Yeah. Yeah. Well over a year later, a year and 3 months later, we've been asking for it day one. We don't have, they tell the judge we've given them everything, and they go, no, we didn't. We didn't get these freaking contact sheets. Now, we didn't raise a stink every single week because it was a little strategic on our part to get these after they stepped on their dicks and said, oh, he was here and there and he couldn't have possibly planted the glove. Because by now, we have enough stuff. We had looked at his preliminary testimony and we had still shot it, or when he's talking about the gloves with the S on them, gloves, and he said, I saw them, which is obviously plural.
And two gloves.
And we're now certain, most of us by now, Simpson couldn't have done this. We don't have time, all that stuff, and this case is getting freaking ridiculous. Ito's bringing movie stars into his chambers every day, letting the jury sit for hours. It's a freaking Hollywood show, and we're used to doing street cases, murder cases. To go, goddamn, this thing's well over a year long. I've never been in a murder case. It was a year and 4 or 5 months old. So, anyways.
Pat,
let me just jump in, because it's funny you mentioned how long it is. Like here right now in Brooklyn, Joaquin Guzman, who's known as El Chapo, is on trial. That trial is faster than I can even imagine.
Jury's not reached a verdict yet, by the way.
The jury has not reached a verdict yet. No. And I think that they're probably going to, it's going to take a little bit longer. But I'm just saying that trial, the speed with which again, when the government wants to prosecute someone and whatnot and they want to get it over with. I mean, they can move pretty fast. But like you said, I mean, it's different when, they want to, the media gets involved again, and there are no cameras and stuff allowed in New York, but in courtrooms in New York. But no, it's just funny. I was just thinking of again the length, how much time this takes, and I mean when you think about going after El Chapo, I mean you're talking about international drug traffickers, and they're able to wrap that thing up in a matter of a few weeks.
Yep.
And it's mind-boggling.
No, and all of us that did, Barry, Peter, me, almost everybody, maybe except for Shapiro. I didn't know if he ever tried a murder case, but everybody else had been in murder trials. We're all going, what is this? Are you kidding me? Now they're bringing in somebody, Lakshmanan. I forget how to say the guy's name, and I don't want to butcher it, but the fella they brought in that was the medical examiner, they had him on there for 8 days.
Yeah.
He did not even do the autopsy for 8 days. Kellner, or whatever, the prosecutor, he's got a ruler and he's like, oh, could he have stabbed over his back? Going this, all these gymnastics that were, we come back and laugh. I mean, really, it was very serious, but we would just laugh and go, we got to go in and fight him again tomorrow because they'll keep doing this bullshit as long as Ito lets them get away with it.
Yeah, I mean, Ito has a lot to answer for all of this. I don't quite understand what, I mean, unless he thought he was going to get like a TV deal out of this or something.
Hey, Pat.
I think he was just like, he's married to a high-ranking police officer. He's a former prosecutor. I think he bought right in early on, and that Simpson was probably guilty, and went with it. But then started to go. That trial totally got away with him, away from him. I'm sorry. And, he just, we could never understand it. It never could understand why we're going to wait an extra 20 minutes after lunch because, Bruce Jenner's back in the chambers or Carrick, I forget some of the
Pat, one witness that Judge Ito did not allow to testify because of some unknown discrepancy is one that is important in terms of blood evidence and proving that OJ was cut in Chicago. Could you tell the audience who Lori Menzione is?
Lori Menzione was a gal that worked for, I want to say, Cook's Travel, the emergency part of it. In other words, if your mom died today and she's in California and you're already going to Canada, you got to get in there and say, hey, can I change his flight to get there and get out there? My mom passed away. And, usually you got to get death certificate and all that sort of stuff. But when celebrities, they get celebrities are important people, say some colonel is home from the Army and he's got to have an emergency flight. So American Airlines, what happened was OJ's on the phone with Kathy Randa, his personal secretary. He says, I just heard, I got to get back, blah, blah, blah. Can you change my flight? Get me out of here first thing in the morning. Kathy's trying. She gets hold of American Airlines people. They transfer the call or call forward, whatever it's called, to the Cook's Travel. And it's Lori Menzione with some other people that she works with. She's told me about the other ladies. And so she doesn't know who OJ Simpson is. But anyway, she hears the guy. He said, my wife is dead. Doesn't say murdered. He doesn't know anything about it. And the cops have my kids. I need to get home really bad. And she's kind of trying to be very empathetic and all that sort of stuff. And so she hears the glass break. And he says, oh, God. And he's kind of moaning. And he's throwing the lamps around. And he's, like, freaking out. And she's trying to make the changes on the computer and all that. And, by the way, they have notes on all this in their computer, right? Got a call from, Pierce. And he wanted to get to Brian right away. So they have these notes in the computer, which we ended up getting. Ito wouldn't let it in. This one was very important to us because it shows he cut his finger in the sink in the bathroom at the O'Hare Plaza. He had no visual cuts or bruises when he arrived in Chicago, at the airport, at the hotel, nothing. And then after this, when he gets downstairs, first thing he asks for is a Band-Aid because he's got a big cut on his middle finger where he just cut it on a glass. And so Ito would not let that in because he said we didn't have, I think he said, a foundation call. In other words, OJ's records only showed him calling Kathy Randa. And Kathy forwarded it to American Airlines, who forwarded it to Lori Menzione. So it was something like that he wouldn't let it in. I mean, we were going crazy because we did everything. We got phone records. We got everything we could, put it together. Just a nice lady, and she didn't come forward till, I want to say maybe during the trial, like before we started our defense case, she reached out and I got a hold of her and started talking to her. And the reason she came forward was because her and all of her girlfriends knew about this phone call and said, you gotta tell somebody about this, So they were kind of, good citizens saying, hey, maybe this is helpful to somebody. And they're not. And she probably thought everyone that helped us thought OJ's guilty. They didn't realize they're helping us with their truthful statements like
Denise
Pilnack, all those gals on Bundy,
Judy Callender.
Lang with the dog, and I don't want to cut us off because I know we could probably keep going, but we're at the very end of the episode. Just a few seconds left. I just want to thank both Pat McKenna and Brian Heiss for joining me. Pat, I'd love to have you back on. Maybe when you're not quite so sick. I thank you for sticking it out with us for 2 hours. And Brian, thank you as well. Brian, you and I are going to be doing something soon on Ed Buck, which is an interesting case. And of course, you can find Brian's stuff by going to ojsimpson.co. You can find all of my work by going to porkinspolicyreview.com. You can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Pierce Redmond. Thank you all so much for listening, and I will be talking to you all very soon.
No rules. No rules. No taboo topics. No taboo topics. No fear of doom. No fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
When the weapons of mass destruction turned out not to be true, I expected the American people to rise up. They didn't. Then, when the Abu Ghraib torture thing surfaced, and it was revealed that our government participated in rendition, a practice where we kidnap people and turn them over to regimes who specialize in torture, I was sure then the American people would be heard from. We stood mute. Then came the news that we jailed thousands of so-called terrorist suspects, locked them up without the right to a trial or even the right to confront their accusers. Certainly, we would never stand for that. We did. And now it's been discovered the executive branch has been conducting massive illegal domestic surveillance on its own citizen, you and me. And I at least consoled myself that finally, the American people will have had enough. Evidently, we haven't. In fact, if the people of this country have spoken the messages, we're okay with it all.
I got an idea about homelessness. You know what they ought to do? Change the name of it. Change the name of it. It's not homelessness. It's houselessness. It's houses these people need. A home is an abstract idea. A home is a setting. It's a state of mind. These people need houses. Physical, tangible structures. They need low-cost housing. But where are you going to put it? Well, that's fine, but where are you going to put it? Where are you going to put it? Nobody wants you to build low-cost housing near their house. People don't want it near them. We got something in this country, you've heard of it, it's called NIMBY. N-I-M-B-Y. Not in my backyard. People don't want anything, any kind of social help located anywhere near them. Try to do a homeless shelter somewhere. Try to open up a little home for some retarded people who want to work their way into the community. People say, not in my backyard. People don't want anything near them, especially if it might help somebody else. Part of that great American spirit of generosity we hear about. Great, generous American spirit. You can ask an Indian about that. Ask an Indian about if you can find one.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Simpson, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
Tell the truth. Don't be bullshitting people. There's enough bullshit as it is. In fact, there's just enough. Did you know that? There's just enough bullshit to hold things together in this country. Bullshit is the glue that binds us as a nation. Where would we be without our safe, familiar American bullshit? Land of the free, home of the brave, the American dream. All men are equal, justice is blind, the press is free, your vote counts. Business is honest, the good guys win, the police are on your side, God is watching you, your standard of living will never decline, and everything is going to be just fine. The official national bullshit story. I call it the American okie doke.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control is good. 5, right, copy. 3, 2, 1. Engage.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio.